And so this native advertising is meaning that certain media companies are now just basically becoming ad agencies. So BuzzFeed is much more like Saatchi and Saatchi's, say, in the 1980s, possibly, than it is like the New York Times, even though it does great journalism. The core of what it does is to get money from advertisers, repackage it, and follow its what they call its social footprint. The reason you can do this and the reason that advertising agencies is failing is because you can't just go out and buy a bus site anymore. You know, if you have to be in the social app and you're Nike, you have two ways of reaching your audience. Either you get everybody to like Nike, which is actually quite, we all feel a bit foolish, don't we? Even if we do really, really like something. I hate being caught out on Facebook where you've accidentally put your thumb on something and it crops up saying, Emily Bell likes, I don't know, sort of Tide or some sort of like washing powder. It's like, no, I don't like it. I use it, but I don't like it. It's just there. So you can either do that, and most people don't like brands in that way, or you can go through the social footprint that has been created by all the great journalism or cat memes or pictures of Sean Penn interviewing drug lords or whatever it is, however it is you've created your following, that's now available to advertisers. So the engine of a lot of digital news businesses now is going to be effectively being in the advertising business. And of course, for those of us, you know, back to the church and state argument, for those of us who grew up with this idea that there was a very, very firm divide between what the advertising department did and what the editorial department did, this is a really uncomfortable new reality that we have to grapple with. Quite a lot of publishers building their own destinations. Mark Thompson, formerly of the BBC, now the New York Times, says it's really important that we do both. We have to distribute everywhere, but we also have to build our own strong presence. The New York Times can probably afford to invest in that. Lots and lots of other people can't. So what's happening is not only have we seen this sort of shift, if you like, in power, but we also are seeing sort of so much stuff now, both through publishers using these platforms more. Everybody here is a publisher. Every time you put something online, you're publishing. Acts of journalism are committed every day, not necessarily by journalists. You now have tons and tons of videos and photos which people share, some of which are just very social. They're pictures of your cat or your children. Some of them are really important bits of news journalism. They might be capturing an attack in Paris. There's that very famous piece of video of the gunman for Charlie Hebdo, the gunman in the Charlie Hebdo attack, shooting the policeman in the street. The story of that particular clip is that the man who shot it from his apartment window was just watching what was going on in the street, realised he had something really sort of alarming and potentially important, did, as he said in interviews, I just did what I normally do, which is I just put it online. 10 minutes later, he'd thought through, is it a really good idea for me to have somebody shooting somebody I don't know dead in the street? Is it really a good idea for this to be linked to my profile? We don't know who these gunmen are. We don't know where they are. So he went back to take it down, but it was too late. And in the 10 minutes it had been online, it had been taken by somebody else, had been put on YouTube. And within the hour, he was watching his clip on the evening news, even though he would actually much rather nobody saw it at all. Which is, again, just a sort of an example of how use is running ahead of how we're thinking about perhaps, you know, responsible publishing on these platforms. So what we have is so much material that the companies who are publishing it, this is where we don't really know what to think about Facebook, because they're making us money, but they're also taking control away from the process. We don't actually know how these companies are showing us the stories that are reaching us. So, for instance, this morning, I had breakfast with my good friend Bill Thompson of the BBC, who said, did you see that story yesterday about the BBC? And the answer was I didn't, because I've been entirely reliant on my phone, because I don't have TV while I'm in Cambridge. And all of my news was really about the things that I have been reading about. So I had hundreds of stories about what was happening with technology companies. I had lots and lots and lots of stories about Apple and the FBI. I didn't have any stories at all about the BBC. And I didn't really know whether this was just because they hadn't been well covered or whether it was just because they weren't being shown to me in my feed. because I hadn't indicated to the Facebook algorithms that I was interested in them. So we don't know how, which is a big problem, actually, democratically, if we don't know how stories are being fed to people. We don't know how the algorithm is sorting them. We can't tell what the path is that they're taking. We don't know why certain stories are upweighted and others are downweighted. Facebook did a great job, actually, of saying, come and talk to us about our algorithm. We'll explain what it is. But even there, I think that they're behind the curve in really understanding why people liking the same things shouldn't, is actually not necessarily the best way to sort out what news stories they're consuming. And what this leads to, if you like, this sort of algorithmic lack of transparency, no algorithmic accountability, is really sort of significant questions about free speech and how do we know that everybody is getting equal access? Where is the transparency? Nobody's ever had completely equal access to the public sphere, but at least we've been able to ask questions about why did the editor do this? Why did the BBC decide to have that person on in the morning and not this person? We have a debate about it. Now we're not even really aware that it's happening. Only last week, actually, in the US, a number of high-profile right-wing bloggers, and here's one, was suspended. Now, he's a kind of really unpleasant individual who is a self-confessed anti-feminist, which means that he's not going to be invited around to my house anytime soon. And he expresses sort of pretty strong and, I think, sort of unpleasant views. This is now categorised as hate speech by Twitter. And it means that his account has been taken away. There have been other right-wing bloggers in the States just in the past couple of weeks saying, we're worried that we're being what they call shadow banned, which means that Twitter has the power, if it wants to mute certain people so that when they tweet something, it's still published, it's just nobody sees it. You can see it on your timeline. It just doesn't necessarily end up in front of anybody else. Now, for politics, this is actually a really sort of significant thing because Twitter has a small user base, and it's a fairly rambunctious and terrible place to be if you don't like being an argumentative public figure. But if you do like being an argumentative public figure, it's paradise. And also, it's a place where lots and lots of other media actually commission their punditry from. So as a journalist in the US said to me, when you disappear off somewhere like Twitter, you really disappear. You're not suddenly asked to appear on television shows. And again, this is a weakness perhaps in terms of how mainstream media or in terms of our sort of the ways that we find our sources. But it does mean that, even on the left, I think this kind of control has left people feeling slightly queasy about what it means to put our public sphere into the hands of a small number of private companies, because we don't really have an alternative at the moment. And actually, sort of outside existing laws, there's no restraint or compunction on any platform to restrict certain types of content to promote others. It's an unregulated field. And what the companies say is, well, we can't show you what is in our algorithm. We can't show you how you get access to the news feed. Because if we did, then it would suddenly be full of sort of spam and people trying to game it and doing bad things with it, and it's our commercial IP. How much should we really care about this? So you might be thinking, really, is this actually important? Does this really matter? Well, again, 40% in America, 40% of adult Americans told the Pew Center last quarter that they get their they get their news of the day from Facebook. 38% last week told Pew that Facebook was their source of news for what was happening in the political campaigns out there. 40% in a country the size of America, there's never been a media outlet that has had that much audience share. It's like somebody saying, if Rupert Murdoch was owning one outlet that was representing all of that sort of coverage of politics, we would be extremely alarmed, and rightfully so.